The Andromeda Polytechnic Institute had been operating for approximately 3,000 standard galactic cycles, which was impressive, considering most educational institutions collapsed under the weight of their own bureaucracy within the first century. The university floated in a carefully maintained orbital position above the trade moon of Nexus 7, a location chosen specifically because it was so monumentally boring that students had no choice but to actually study. The architecture was all gleaming chrome and transparent aluminum, the kind of aggressively modern design that screamed we have more credits than taste. Thousands of species from across 7 galaxies sent their best and brightest here, which was a polite way of saying they sent whoever could afford the tuition and had at least 3 functioning brain cells to rub together. The thing about galactic higher education was that it had become less about learning and more about posturing. Sure, there were lectures about quantum mechanics and xenobiology, but the real curriculum was unspoken, figuring out where your species ranked in the grand cosmic pecking order. It was like high school, except everyone could breathe different atmospheric compositions, and some students had more eyes than fingers. The Zentarii, for instance, had spent the last 5 centuries making absolutely certain everyone knew they were warrior poets of the highest caliber. The Quilnari prided themselves on their 16-chambered brains. The Heclons could solve differential equations in their sleep, probably because they never actually slept and just vibrated at frequencies that suggested unconsciousness. And then there were humans. Humans had only joined the galactic community about 40 standard years ago, which in cosmic terms was roughly equivalent to showing up to a party 5 minutes after it started and expecting everyone to know your name. They came from a little blue marble in an unfashionable arm of the Milky Way, the kind of planet that cartographers labeled unremarkable when they were being generous, and how was anything alive there when they were being honest. The general consensus among the galactic elite was that humans were adorable in the way that a 3-legged grub was adorable, pitifully weak, absurdly fragile, and somehow still alive, despite all evidence suggesting they shouldn't be. This was the context in which Vexor Clint strutted into Advanced Xenosociology 301 on what he assumed would be an ordinary 4th-day morning. Vexor was Zentarii, which meant he stood roughly 8 feet tall, had 4 arms that could bench press a small spacecraft, and skin that looked like someone had taken obsidian and decided it needed more threatening. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world, where the primary form of conflict resolution was seeing who could throw the other person the farthest. They had 3 genders, none of which made sense to anyone outside their species, and a cultural obsession with honor that would make ancient samurai look like casual hobbyists. Vexor himself had scored in the top percentile of his class back home, which meant he could recite 73 different war poems from memory and had only accidentally killed 2 people in sparring matches. The classroom was one of those amphitheater-style arrangements where everyone could watch everyone else pretend to pay attention. The seats were adjustable for different body types, which was necessary when your student body included everything from gelatinous blobs to crystalline structures that technically counted as sentient. About 40 students were scattered throughout the space, representing maybe 15 different species, all of them trying very hard to look like they belonged in a 300-level course. Professor Quilnix was already at the podium, which was less a podium and more a floating platform that adjusted to whatever height the professor needed. Quilnix was a Vornathi, a species that looked like someone had given an octopus a graduate degree and existential anxiety. They had 7 prehensile limbs, each of which was currently occupied with a different task: writing on a holographic board, shuffling datapads, adjusting their translator implant, gesturing emphatically at nothing, stress grooming their sensory tendrils, holding their morning stimulant beverage, and frantically trying to organize the lecture notes they had definitely prepared and not thrown together 10 minutes ago. Vexor took his customary seat in the 3rd row, the position that said, "I'm engaged but not desperate." Around him, his classmates were settling in with varying degrees of enthusiasm. There was Clix, a Heclon who looked like a very judgmental praying mantis and never stopped calculating probabilities in their head. Beside them sat Gormath, a Thrinian whose species was basically sentient rocks and who communicated through vibrations that the universal translators rendered as a perpetually disappointed grandparent. In the back, a cluster of culinary students were already networking, their brain tentacles occasionally brushing together in what was either telepathic communication or just showing off. Settle down, Professor Quilnix announced, their translator rendering their speech in the bland, vaguely condescending tone that all academic translators seem to default to. I know you're all desperately excited about today's topic, which is to say I know at least 3 of you are paying attention and the rest of you are wondering if you can get away with skipping the reading again. A few nervous laughs rippled through the classroom. Vexor didn't laugh. He never laughed at professor jokes. It was beneath him. Today, we're discussing resource allocation strategies in hostile environmental contexts. Quilnix continued, 3 of their limbs now drawing complex diagrams in the air. Specifically, how different species approach survival in suboptimal conditions. This is particularly relevant given that we have a new addition to our class. That was when she walked in. The human was late, which was apparently a species-wide trait because every human Vexor had ever encountered operated on what they called island time or fashionably late, or I forgot my datapad and had to go back. She was small by galactic standards, maybe 5.5 feet tall, with dark hair pulled back in what humans called a ponytail and skin that was some shade of brown that the lighting made hard to pin down. She wore the standard student jumpsuit, modified for human proportions, and carried a worn bag that looked like it had survived several small wars. Sorry I'm late, Professor, she said, her voice carrying that particular human accent that suggested she had learned galactic standard from someone who had learned it from someone who had learned it from a badly translated instruction manual. The gravlift was broken and I had to take the stairs. The stairs, Quilnix repeated slowly, are 47 levels. Yeah, it was a good warm-up. Several students exchanged glances. Warm-up? For what? Class, this is Maya Torres, our exchange student from Earth. She'll be joining us for the remainder of the semester. Please make her feel welcome, and try not to stare at her with the kind of anthropological fascination usually reserved for zoo exhibits. Maya grinned and waved at the class, before finding a seat 2 rows ahead of Vexor. He studied her with the kind of casual assessment he'd been trained to apply to potential opponents. Weak, obviously weak. Humans had no natural armor, no claws, no venom sacs, no defensive capabilities whatsoever. They were endurance predators, sure, but that was only impressive if you were prey. The Zentarii were apex predators who had climbed to the top of their food chain by being better at violence than anything else on their planet. Now then, Quilnix was saying, for today's exercise, I want you to pair up and debate optimal survival strategies for your respective species in a resource-scarce environment. This will count toward your participation grade, which I know none of you care about until the end of the semester when you realize you're failing. The classroom erupted into the usual chaos of students trying to pair up with people they either knew or thought would do all the work. Vexor was considering his options when he noticed Maya looking around with the kind of lost expression that suggested she knew exactly 0 people in this class. An idea formed in Vexor's mind. It wasn't a particularly kind idea, but kindness had never been his strong suit. Here was an opportunity to demonstrate Zentarii superiority in front of an audience, against an opponent who couldn't possibly offer any real resistance. It would be like crushing an insect, except the insect was sentient and would remember the humiliation. Human, he called out, his voice carrying easily across the classroom. I challenge you to debate me. The room went quiet in that way, that rooms do when everyone senses drama and desperately wants to watch. Maya turned around, looking up at him with an expression that was hard to read. Most humans were hard to read, actually. They had this thing where they smiled when they were nervous and laughed when they were uncomfortable, and cried when they were happy, like their emotional responses had been programmed by a committee that couldn't agree on anything. Sure, Maya said with a shrug, sounds fun. Fun. She thought this would be fun. Vexor felt his secondary heart's rate increase with anticipation. This was going to be easier than he thought. Professor Quilnix looked between them with an expression that might have been concern if octopi could express concern. Are you certain? Perhaps Maya would be more comfortable with, I'm good. Maya interrupted cheerfully. Let's do this. They moved to the front of the class, taking positions on opposite sides of the debate platform. The holographic display flickered to life between them, ready to project supporting data as needed. The rest of the class arranged themselves to watch, and Vexor could feel their attention like a physical weight. Good. Let them watch a master at work. The scenario, Quilnix announced, clearly resigned to whatever was about to happen, is a resource-scarce environment with limited water, minimal vegetation, and a hostile indigenous population. Each of you will present your species' approach to survival and explain why your strategy is superior. Vexor, as the challenger, you'll go first. Vexor straightened to his full height, all four arms spreading in the traditional Zentarii gesture of confident dominance. The Zentarii approach is simple and effective. We are warriors. We take what we need. Our homeworld of Zentarii has gravity twice that of galactic standard. Our atmosphere is 40% denser. We evolved fighting predators that would make most species flee in terror. In a resource-scarce environment, we would simply dominate the indigenous population, claim the resources, and establish a fortified position. Our physical superiority makes this trivial. It was a solid opening, backed by facts that everyone in the room already knew. The Zentarii were legitimately impressive by most measures. Vexor could see several students nodding appreciatively. Maya was leaning against the podium like she was waiting for a bus. Cool speech. My turn? Quilnix made a gesture that might have been permission, or might have been a prayer to whatever gods the Vornathi believed in. Okay, so, Earth. Maya pushed off from the podium and started pacing, her hands moving as she talked in that very human way, where they seemed to think their points were more valid if they gestured enough. Where do I even start? Our gravity is about 1 standard G, which I know seems weak to you, but here's the thing that's just the baseline. We have places on Earth where the gravity effectively changes because we have these things called mountains, and some of them are so tall that there's not enough oxygen at the top to keep you conscious. People climb them anyway, for fun. A few students shifted uncomfortably. Vexor frowned. That was a weird flex, but okay. Our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen and oxygen, which sounds boring until you realize that oxygen is incredibly reactive and basically wants to corrode everything. We're constantly on fire at a cellular level. It's called metabolism, and it's just slow burning. We literally rust from the inside out, and we call that aging. Clicks. The Hecklon made a clicking sound that the translator rendered as that cannot possibly be efficient. It's not, Maya agreed cheerfully. But efficiency is for species that don't have to worry about everything trying to kill them constantly. See, Earth is what you guys call a Class 1-2 Deathworld, which honestly feels low. We have weather that can kill you, not like scary alien weather. Regular weather. We have frozen water that falls from the sky and can crush buildings. We have rotating columns of air that pick up houses and throw them around like toys. We have waves of water taller than this building that just show up and delete coastal cities. Exaggeration, Vexor scoffed. Natural disasters are hardly unique to Earth. Oh, I'm just getting started, big guy. Maya's grin was the kind of grin that should have come with a warning label. Let's talk about Earth's biosphere. We have insects that can lift 50 times their body weight. We have plants that can kill you by touch. We have fungi that take over other organisms' brains and turn them into zombies. We have bacteria that can survive in boiling water, freezing ice, pure acid, and the vacuum of space. We found them living inside nuclear reactors, eating radiation. The classroom was very quiet now. Our oceans, Maya continued, really warming to her topic now, cover 70% of the planet and are full of things that would give you nightmares if you had the brain architecture to process fear properly. We have fish that hunt in packs and can strip a large animal to bones in minutes. We have jellyfish, whose sting causes pain so severe that victims have been known to go into shock and drown. We have octopi, no offense, professor, that are so venomous that there's no antidote, and they're small enough to hide in your shoe. Quilnix's tendrils had gone very still. And that's just the ocean. On land, we have predators with bite forces that can crush bone, cats big enough to drag prey twice their size up trees, bears that can run 30 miles per hour and also happen to be bulletproof from the front because their skull structure is that dense. We have snakes whose venom causes your blood to stop clotting or start clotting everywhere at once, depending on the species, because evolution on Earth apparently has a cruel sense of humor. Vexor felt his tertiary stomach clench. Surely your species has natural defenses against we don't, Maya interrupted. And she was definitely enjoying this now. Humans have basically no natural weapons. No claws, no venom, no armor plating. Our skin tears if you look at it wrong. We can die from falling downstairs. We can die from drinking too much water. We can die from a small cut that gets infected. We're so fragile that we have an entire medical field dedicated to keeping babies alive because they're born premature by comparison to most species and can barely do anything for months. Then how? Vexor said slowly, his pride warring with genuine confusion. Has your species survived? Maya's grin got wider. We're persistent and creative, and we hold grudges. See, you guys think of survival in terms of being the biggest or the strongest or the most armored. We think of survival in terms of outlasting everything else. You know what we did when we found predators that were faster and stronger than us? We followed them. For days. Sometimes weeks. We just walked after them until they collapsed from exhaustion, and then we killed them with rocks. We're so good at throwing things that we have an entire section of our brain dedicated to calculating trajectories. We domesticated wolves, which were apex predators, by basically being friendlier and more patient than they were. We turned them into dogs. We did the same thing with cats, except cats domesticated themselves because they figured out that hanging around humans meant easy food. Gormouth vibrated a question that translated to, "What about your resource allocation strategy?" Oh, right. The actual debate topic. Maya laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that suggested she had forgotten they were supposed to be debating anything. Okay, so in a resource-scarce environment with hostiles, here's what humans would do. First, we'd scout the area. Humans are incredibly good at pattern recognition. We see faces in clouds and conspiracies in coincidences. This makes us excellent at spotting threats and opportunities. Second, we'd establish a water source. Humans can survive weeks without food but only days without water, so that's priority one. Third, we'd make friends with the indigenous population if possible. Make friends? Vexor couldn't keep the scorn from his voice. With hostiles? Everything's only hostile until it's not, Maya said with a shrug. Humans have this weird ability to form pack bonds with basically anything. We've made pets out of apex predators, venomous reptiles, and literal parasites. There's a human subculture dedicated to keeping spiders as companions. Spiders, the 8-legged things that most humans are instinctively afraid of. We're so good at making friends that we feel guilty about killing plants. And if friendship fails? Clicks asked, their translator adding a note of clinical curiosity. Then we get creative. Maya's expression shifted into something that made Vexor's primary spine tingle. Humans are tool users. We're not unique in that, but we're prolific. We make tools to make tools to make tools. We've created weapons that can level cities, poisons that have no cure, and diseases that we keep in storage just in case we need to weaponize them again. We fought 2 global wars, using industrial-scale violence, and we documented everything so thoroughly that you can watch videos of it. We have sport competitions based on simulated combat. We have an entire entertainment industry based on imagining new ways to kill each other. The classroom had achieved a level of silence usually reserved for funerals or the moment before someone says something catastrophically stupid. But here's the really fun part, Maya said, and several students flinched at her tone. The scenario mentioned limited resources and hostile populations, right? That's just called history for humans. We spent most of our evolutionary timeline in exactly those conditions. We spread to every continent on our planet, including the ones covered in ice where nothing should be able to live. We went to environments where the air was too thin to breathe and the temperature would kill us in minutes. And we said, I bet I could build a house here. We went to our moon, which has no atmosphere and is covered in dust that's basically tiny glass shards, and we played golf there. Golf, a recreational activity involving hitting a small ball into a distant hole. We did that on our moon because we thought it would be funny. Professor Quilnix had given up any pretense of moderating and was just watching with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. And before anyone asks, Maya continued, yes, we know we're living on a death world. We know that most species would consider Earth a nightmare planet. We have theme parks based on deliberately putting ourselves in danger for entertainment. We jump out of aircraft with fabric parachutes for fun. We strap ourselves to boards and slide down mountains covered in frozen water. We go into caves that have never been explored and might not have any exit. We swim with predators that could eat us. We climb vertical rock faces without safety equipment because using safety equipment is considered cheating by some climbers. Vexor felt something crack in his worldview. It wasn't loud, but it was definitely there, a small, hairline fracture in his understanding of how things worked. That's insane, he said quietly. Yeah, probably, Maya agreed. But here's the thing about humans and resource-scarce environments. We're not the strongest or the fastest or the most naturally gifted. But we're the ones who looked at every other species on our planet and said, I bet I could eat that. We're the ones who found plants that were poisonous and figured out how to process them until they weren't. We're the ones who took bitter beans, roasted them, ground them up, ran hot water through them, and called it a beverage. We eat fermented plant matter and call it civilization. We consume the lactations of other species well into adulthood, which I'm told is weird for mammals. We found mushrooms that cause hallucinations and incorporated them into religious ceremonies. Your species sounds like a galactic liability. Gormath vibrated, though there was a note of what might have been respect in the frequency. Oh, absolutely, Maya said. We're disaster-prone, self-destructive, and way too curious for our own good. But we're also collaborative, adaptable, and really, really hard to kill permanently. You want to know our strategy for surviving in hostile environments? We make the environment less hostile. We change it. We build, we irrigate, we domesticate, we terraform on a small scale. And if we can't change the environment, we change ourselves. We have medical technology that can replace failing organs. We have genetic modifications. We have cybernetic implants. We have some humans who've replaced so much of their original biology with technology that the question of where the human ends and the machine begins is basically philosophical. She paused, looking directly at Vexor. So yeah, in your scenario with limited resources and hostile populations, a Zentarii warrior would dominate through force. That's a valid strategy. But a human? A human would show up with a water filtration device made from local materials, a map of the area drawn from 3 days of observation, a preliminary peace treaty with the locals based on trade agreements, and a backup plan involving explosive compounds synthesized from indigenous plants. And if all that failed, the human would just outlast everyone else through sheer stubborn refusal to die. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that had weight and texture. Vexor stood there, all 4 arms hanging uselessly at his sides, trying to process what had just happened. He had walked into this debate, expecting an easy victory. He had expected to demonstrate the obvious superiority of Zentarii strength and warrior culture. What he had not expected was to be systematically dismantled by a creature that weighed less than one of his arms and looked like a stiff breeze could knock her over. So, Maya said, stuffing her hands in her pockets in that casual human way that suggested she hadn't just caused several students to reconsider their understanding of biological classification. How'd I do? Professor Quilnix slowly extended 3 of their limbs in what might have been applause or might have been a gesture of surrender. I I think we're going to take a short break. Everyone please exit the classroom in an orderly fashion, and try not to think too hard about the existential implications of what you just heard. The students filed out in a daze. Vexor found himself standing motionless, his mind running through everything he thought he knew about humans and finding it catastrophically insufficient. He had read the files. Everyone had read the files. Humans were classified as a developing species, technologically adolescent, physically unimpressive. The files mentioned that Earth was a higher gravity world with an active biosphere, but the files had not adequately conveyed the sheer concentrated chaos of what that meant. "Hey, big guy." Maya was looking up at him with an expression that might have been concern. "You okay? You look like you're processing some stuff." "Your world," Vexor said slowly, his translator probably adding a note of existential crisis to his words, "is a nightmare." "I mean, parts of it are nice," Maya offered. "We have beaches, sunsets. Those are pretty. You have waves that can destroy cities and predators in the water." "Well, yeah, but they're usually not in the same place at the same time. Usually." She paused. "Okay, sometimes they are, but that's why we have warning systems." Vexor looked at this small, fragile creature, who had just casually described a planet that sounded like it was actively trying to kill everything on it, and who had grown up there thinking it was normal. "How," he asked, "are you all so calm about this?" Maya tilted her head, considering the question. "I guess because it's all we've ever known. Like, you grew up on a high-gravity world with dense atmosphere and big predators, right? That's normal for you. For me, tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes are just things that happen. You learn the safety protocols, you prepare for the possibilities, and you get on with your life. Most of the time, Earth is pretty peaceful." "Most of the time," Vexor repeated. "Yeah, like 95% of the time, nothing is actively trying to kill you. Those are pretty good odds." Those were not, in Vexor's opinion, good odds at all. Those were terrible odds. A 5% chance of death at any given moment was not something to be casual about. But humans were apparently just fine with it, which suggested that either their risk assessment capabilities were severely impaired, or they had collectively decided that life wasn't worth living if you spent it being safe. Over the next few days, Vexor found himself observing Maya with new eyes. He watched her in the cafeteria, casually consuming foods that would be toxic to half the species in the room. He saw her in the gym, running on the treadmill at speeds that seemed excessive for someone with such short legs. He noticed her in the library, reading xenobiology texts and occasionally making notes like, "Oh, that's why they can't process alcohol," or "Huh. Guess most species don't have an appendix that randomly tries to kill them." Other students had noticed too. There was a growing awareness that humans might not be the adorable, harmless species everyone had assumed. The revelation spread through the student body like a particularly juicy piece of gossip, which was exactly what it was. By the end of the week, human students who had previously been ignored or patronized were suddenly being treated with a mixture of respect and nervous apprehension. The crystalline Hecklans started asking human students about Earth's geology. The Quilnari wanted to know about human neurology. The Thrinians were fascinated by human architecture and the fact that humans built structures designed to withstand natural disasters, rather than simply avoiding disaster-prone areas. It was like the entire university had collectively realized that they had been sharing space with a species that defined hostile environment very differently than everyone else. Vexor himself had started doing research. Real research, not just reading the summary files. He learned that humans had spread across their entire planet in less than 100,000 years, which was incredibly fast by evolutionary standards. He discovered that human history was basically a long sequence of humans encountering problems and solving them through increasingly creative applications of violence, diplomacy, or both, simultaneously. He found records of human art, music, and literature, and was disturbed to find that a significant portion of it focused on survival, conflict, or exploring the question, what if everything went wrong at the same time? He also learned that humans had brought several domesticated species with them when they joined the galactic community. Dogs, which were descended from wolves and had been bred into hundreds of varieties for different purposes. Cats, which had technically domesticated themselves and were still only semi-domesticated depending on who you asked. Horses, which were large prey animals that humans had convinced to carry them around. And various plants that humans had modified so extensively through selective breeding that their wild ancestors were barely recognizable. The more Vexor learned, the more he realized that his entire understanding of strength had been based on incomplete data. Zentarii strength was impressive, sure, they could crush, they could break, they could dominate through physical force, but human strength was different. It was the strength of persistence, of adaptation, of looking at a problem that should kill you and deciding to solve it instead. It was the strength of a species that had clawed its way to the top of the food chain without any natural weapons, and then decided that wasn't enough, so they went to space. About 2 weeks after the debate, Vexor found Maya in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The deck was usually empty this time of day cycle, which made it a good place for thinking or contemplating the vastness of space, or whatever it was people did when they wanted to be alone with their thoughts. "Can I join you?" Vexor asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Maya looked up and smiled. "Sure, it's a big universe, plenty of room." They stood in silence for a while, watching the distant stars and the occasional ship passing by. Vexor tried to figure out how to phrase what he wanted to say. Apologies were not part of Zentarii culture. Admitting weakness was shameful, but he was starting to suspect that humans had a different definition of strength and weakness than he did. "I underestimated you," he said finally. "In the debate, before. I thought humans were weak." "We kind of are," Maya said with a shrug. "Physically, I mean, you could definitely snap me like a twig if you wanted to. But you're not afraid." "Should I be?" She looked genuinely curious. "Most species would be afraid of the Zentarii. We are warriors, we are bred for combat." "Yeah, but we're in a university, not a battlefield. And anyway, I figure if you wanted to hurt me, you would have done it by now. You're not stupid, and starting an interspecies incident over a debate grade would be really stupid." Vexor felt something that might have been amusement. "Your species is strange. You're not the first person to say that. Probably won't be the last." Maya turned back to the window. "You know what's weird? Looking out at all this, knowing that there are thousands of species out there, all of them adapted to different worlds, different conditions. Back on Earth, we thought we were alone. We thought we were special. Turns out we're just one more species in a really big galaxy." "Your world is special," Vexor said. "It's a nightmare, but it's special." Maya laughed. "Yeah, I guess it is. But here's the thing, every world is special to the people who live there. Your high-gravity, dense atmosphere world made you strong and tough. Our chaotic, disaster-prone world made us adaptable and creative. Neither one is better, just different." "You truly believe that?" "Why wouldn't I? I mean, yeah, I gave you guys a hard time about Earth being a Deathworld, but that doesn't mean I think humans are better than anyone else. We're just different. We bring different skills to the table. That's what makes this whole galactic community thing interesting, right? If everyone was the same, it would be boring." Vexor considered this. It was a very human perspective, the idea that difference was interesting rather than threatening. The Zentarii view was more hierarchical. There were the strong and the weak, the dominant and the submissive. But humans seemed to think in terms of cooperation and complementary skills. They had reached space not through individual strength, but through collective effort, building on thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and technology. "I would like," Vexor said carefully, "to learn more about your world, if you're willing to teach." Maya's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Really? Oh man, where do I even start?" "Okay, so there are 7 continents, right, and each one has its own ecosystems and cultures and weight. Do you want the geology lesson first or the biology lesson? Or we could start with human history, but that gets really complicated really fast. Oh, or I could tell you about the ocean trenches. Those are wild. There are fish down there that produce their own light because it's so dark." As Maya launched into an enthusiastic explanation of Earth's diverse biomes, Vexor found himself listening with genuine interest. He had started the semester thinking he knew everything he needed to know about strength and survival. He had been so certain of Zentarii's superiority, so confident in his understanding of how the galaxy worked. Turned out, he had been wrong about a lot of things. The universe, he was learning, was much stranger and more interesting than he had given it credit for. And humans, those weird, fragile, persistent, creative, absolutely insane humans, were a big part of why. They had taken a planet that should have killed them and turned it into a home. They had faced extinction-level threats and survived. They had looked at the stars and decided to go there, despite having no natural adaptations for space travel. Later that semester, Vexor would write his final thesis on comparative survival strategies across Deathworld species. He would interview Maya extensively, along with several other human students, and would discover that every human had a slightly different perspective on what it meant to be human. Some were proud of their Deathworld heritage. Others found it embarrassing or annoying that everyone made such a big deal about it. A few admitted they were just as terrified of Earth's wildlife as any alien would be. The thesis would earn him top marks and a commendation from the department. But more importantly, it would earn him a friend. Maya would introduce him to other humans, and through them, he would learn that strength came in many forms. Physical power was one form, but there was also the strength of perseverance, of creativity, of community, of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. He would also learn that humans, despite coming from a world that actively tried to kill them on a regular basis, were capable of remarkable kindness. They formed bonds easily, laughed often, and had an almost pathological need to help others. They were the species who would stop to assist a stranger, who would adopt alien pets, who would cry over sad stories about creatures they had never met. They were, in short, a walking contradiction, fragile but persistent, weak but unstoppable, peaceful but capable of incredible violence, simple but complex. And Vexor, who had spent his entire life believing he understood strength, was finally beginning to understand that maybe he had been looking at it all wrong. The semester ended with a final presentation where students shared what they had learned about xenosociology. When it was Vexor's turn, he stood before the class and said, "I learned that the most dangerous species are not always the ones with the biggest teeth or the strongest muscles. Sometimes, they are the ones who refuse to give up, no matter what. And sometimes, they are the ones who turn their enemies into friends." Maya, sitting in the front row, gave him a thumbs up, a human gesture that meant approval. He had learned that one too. As he left the classroom for the last time that semester, Vexor reflected on the bizarre trajectory of his life. He had come to the Andromeda Polytechnic Institute to prove Zentarii's superiority. He was leaving with a new understanding of what superiority even meant. A human friend who regularly sent him memes he didn't understand but appreciated anyway, and a healthy respect for any species that considered natural disasters a normal part of life. The galaxy, he decided, was a much more interesting place with humans in it. Terrifying, occasionally inexplicable, and absolutely exhausting to keep up with, but interesting. And really, in a universe as vast and strange as this one, interesting was probably the best thing you could be.